Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me here on Motivational History. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite people and one of my favorite cities. Boston is one of my favorite cities in the United States because Boston has such a rich history, which is what makes it my favorite. Everywhere you go, there's history all around downtown. If you ever go there, make sure to do the Freedom Trail. It's a 2.5 mile path through downtown Boston, and it passes 16 locations that are pivotal to US history. From Boston Common to Bunker Hill and the Old North Church, there are so many places that our history is founded on, right on that trail. A few years ago, I saw the HBO show JohnAdams, and I immediately fell in love with the story of John Adams and his wife Abigail. If you've never seen the show, you should watch it. Right after I saw the show, I went and picked up this book, which is a great book, John Adams by David McCullough. I want to tell you the story of American independence and how it was formed and the role that John Adams would play in it. But before I get into that, I want to let you know that if you like this video and want to see more videos like it, you can click the subscribe button, and that helps me grow the reach and allows us to do more videos just like this one. Thanks so much for that. Now, about a year ago, I was able to travel to Boston and film most of this video. So you may notice that is before I got a haircut. My hair was quite long at that point. But let's go to Boston.
John Adams was born in a pivotal time in American history. You see, John Adams was a colonist, and the colonists were extremely independent. Now the British, who controlled the colonists, not so much. So to better control the colonists, the British imposed a series of taxes to show the colonists who was really in charge. These taxes were used to control the colonies and were known as the Townshend Acts. The British imposed tax after tax, creatively coming up with more and more ways to squeeze the colonies for money. The colonists didn't like this at all, and tension began building in the colonies, and finally came to a boiling point on the evening of March 5th, 1770. What began as a small argument between a British private and a few colonists outside the Custom House in Boston on King Street quickly turned into what became known as a massacre. The argument began to escalate as more and more colonists gathered together, and they began to harass and throw sticks and snowballs at the soldiers. Soon there were over 50 colonists at the scene, and the sight of British soldiers armed with bayonets just aggravated the crowd further. They began to shout at the soldiers, daring them to fire. Captain Preston then arrived and tried to get the crowd to disperse. Unfortunately, an object thrown from the crowd struck one of the soldiers, Private Montgomery, and knocked him down. The soldiers became enraged after one of them had been hit, and they fired into the crowd, even though they were under orders not to fire. 5 colonists were shot and killed. With the colonies already in turmoil, the story of the Boston Massacre hitting the paper and the famous sketch drawn by Paul Revere himself only escalated the situation. The tension mounted, and the colonists knew that they were about to be at war with England. Just 3 weeks after the Boston Massacre, a grand jury had indicted Captain Preston and his men. If found guilty, they could face the death penalty. Preston and his soldiers could not find a legal representative counsel. They approached several lawyers without success, until 35-year-old John Adams agreed to head their defense. Now this was a very unpopular assignment, one that could have affected his reputation and future income. So why did he do it? John Adams believed in a fair trial. While being a colonist and knowing that these soldiers stood for everything he didn't, he still hoped to be honorable and took their defense, ensuring that they would have a fair trial. Many of the colonists wanted them to just be hanged, but John Adams knew that the country that they were fighting to build must be founded on honesty and integrity. He fought and spoke passionately in the soldiers' defense, and this resulted in their acquittal instead of their deaths. Now, the trial may have been over, but the taxation from England was not, and the next tax was on tea. On December 16, 1773, at Griffin's Wharf in Boston, Massachusetts, American colonists, frustrated and angry at Britain for imposing taxation without representation, dumped 342 chests of British tea into the harbor. The event was the first major act of defiance to British rule over the colonists. It showed Great Britain that Americans would not take taxation and tyranny sitting down, and rallied American patriots across the 13 colonies to fight for their independence. The colonists knew that they could no longer take the taxes from England, and so they formed the first Continental Congress, and JohnAdams was selected to be a part of it. JohnAdams had always been a man filled with self-doubt, and here he was called to be a part of the Continental Congress, the very people who would decide whether or not they would go to war with England. And he felt overwhelmed. He virtually had no political experience. As the American colonies convened, the colonies were on the brink of war with the most powerful nation on earth. Adams knew that this was a decisive moment, but he feared he was not up for the task. Adams saw long before the other delegates that there had to be a break with Britain. John Adams' wife, Abigail Adams, wrote him letters every day, helping build his courage to speak up and to speak for what he knew to be right. Early on the morning of June 17, 1775, Abigail and the children were awakened to the thunder of cannons across the Boston harbor. American militia had been attacked at Bunker Hill by the British troops. This was the first all-out battle of the American Revolutionary War. Abigail wrote to her husband and kept him up to date with what was happening. This only heightened John's belief that there must be a break with Britain. Adams knew that they were now fully engaged in war, but who would lead them during this time of war? John Adams knew just the man, and he spoke up and was among the first to support George Washington as commander of the American forces. Now Congress was still divided. Adams led only a small faction. Most of Congress still favored reconciliation with England, but not John Adams. Adams said, "I am as fond of reconciliation as any man, but the cancer is too far spread for anything short of cutting it out entirely." On April 16, 1775, Paul Revere began to gather tips that a raid was planned for the city of Concord in the coming days. With his intelligence, Revere began making plans to alert the surrounding countryside by horseback that the Redcoats would indeed be arriving to ransack their military supplies. But there were two routes that the British soldiers could take: by land through the Boston Neck and by sea across the Charles River. Paul Revere arranged to have the signal lit in the Old North Church, one lantern if the British were coming by land and two if they were coming by sea. He began to make preparations for his ride to alert the local militias and citizens about the impending attack. Adams believed now more than ever that a Declaration of Independence must take place. He urged Thomas Jefferson, his friend, to help write it. Thomas Jefferson crafted what would become the most important document in American history, the Declaration of Independence. On July 1st, 1776, Congress faced the question of the day: should the colonies declare independence and abandon any hope of reconciliation with England? The doors were locked against spies, and the opposition spoke first. John Dickinson pleaded with the delegates to appease Britain. He basically said, "Let's keep quiet. Don't take this step of faith yet. Let's wait and see what happens." John Adams knew that a step of faith was exactly what they needed. If they wanted this infection of British control gone, the only way to get rid of it was to make a declaration of independence. Adams knew that this was more than just a statement. It was a necessity. He knew that the war that they faced, they couldn't win on their own. They needed allies, and allies wouldn't come if they were still aligned with Britain. With his speech, Adams put his life on the line, but he knew it was something that he must do. The Crown was drawing up lists of people to be hanged, and speaking out against Britain put Adams at the top of that list. But John spoke up anyways and urged Congress to make a declaration, and they did. Independence was formally declared on July 2nd, 1776, a date that John Adams believed would be the most memorable date in American history. But on July 4th, 1776, Congress approved the final text of the Declaration, and signed it.
I love to tell the stories of history. I love to find ways to learn from them. Our history is filled with good and bad, right and wrong, and a lot of gray area in between. On this channel, I won't be discussing the right or the wrong so much as what we can learn from history itself. How can I take this story that happened in history and apply it to my own life living in the 21st century? So today, what can we learn from the story of John Adams? John Adams knew the power of his words. He knew that his words could motivate or they could discourage. He knew that his life and survival were tied to the words that he spoke. I think that today we live in a world where a lot of people are talking, but not many are listening. We as a people want to be heard. That's the reason we have Facebook and other social media apps. They're so popular because it gives each of us a voice. It's the reason I'm talking with you today. That's why it's important for me to always speak the truth and use my words to unite, not to divide. And I hope that you'll do the same. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you learned about this motivational history moment. That's it for this video, and I hope that if you like this video, you will share it as well as give us a like, and make sure you subscribe to see all of my new videos. I release a new video each Tuesday, and make sure you follow me on Instagram at Motivational History Today. Each day I share videos talking about what significant events took place on that day in history. And I leave you with this quote: "We are not the makers of history, we are made by history." Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. See you next time.